Welcome to Morally End. My name's Mark Machado. I'm joined by Sri Lankan cricket historian Nick Brookes in Jamaica. I'm also joined by that woman, Estelle Vasudevan, and the ball guy, or maybe the other ball guy. It's unclear who the comment was directed at. Dominic Machado, my cousin across the pond in the US. We are talking about Sri Lanka's 3 worst performances this calendar year. And boy, there's been a lot of bad performances to choose from. We're going to whittle it all down, boil it down into the 3 ones that left us the most disappointed. Before we get into it, hit the subscribe, hit the follow, leave us your comments, tell all your friends, tell all your family. When they're sitting about watching Home Alone in the front of the house, you can come into the back and get watch this and reminisce. And remember, all the times the boys in blue and sometimes the girls in blue and gold let us down. Dominic, let's get straight into it with your nomination for the 3rd worst performance by a Sri Lanka team this year.
3rd place worst performance. Okay, so I am going to nominate 42 All Out as my 3rd placed worst for performance, and that kind of gives you a sense of how bad the performances are. If 42 All Out is your 3rd worst, I'm picking 42 All Out because I think it was one particular innings that was an abject failure. We didn't see any fight from the Sri Lankan batters. Lowest test inning score ever. They only batted, I think, 13.3 or 13.5 overs. It was just a pathetic display. And one theme that we're going to keep on coming back to is it was Sri Lanka getting off to a poor start and struggling, particularly their batters, when their bowlers were really on top of the game overall. So I think I nominate 42 All Out. And it kind of also sort of the knock-on effect makes it a significant performance. It put us in the back seat in terms of this, we can call it the World Test Championship final now, right? We're hoping to have a good performance and we go and we just totally mess up, total disaster. And from there on, it was a hard fight to try and get a result in South Africa.
Nick, do you want to go next? What you think the worst performance is? So I think the way we'll do this is we'll all put our bottom 3 in, then we'll do our bottom 2, and then our bottom 1, and then let's conclude with what we actually think the kind of final order is. I suspect it's probably going to be kind of the same kind of 3 or 4 games.
So am I giving you my 3rd worst, Marky, or my worst?
Yeah, your 3rd worst. Your 3rd worst.
My 3rd worst is one that I'd almost erased from my memory, which was Sri Lanka's 3rd T20 against India. I think it was maybe Sanath's first series in charge. Sri Lanka posted 137. No, sorry, India posted 137. And Sri Lanka were totally cruising. Right. And then somehow from, I think, needing 20 runs in like the last 3 overs, managed to take it to a super over. Rinku Singh bowled his first ever over in international cricket in the 19, took 2 wickets and went for 3 runs before Surya Kumar Yadav bowled the final over. He also took 2 wickets and went for 5. So 9 runs across the last 2 overs against 2 rank part-timers would have taken Sri Lanka home. And then in the super over, Sri Lanka managed 2. It was the first time I think I've ever seen a team bowled out in the super over. It was just like they conspired to lose a game which they had no right losing, which had no right even being close. And it was at that point before the hope of the Sanath era started when you were like, it was off the back of the World Cup when you were like, everything is awful. Everything is so bad. And I think it was also, in my mind, retrospectively at least, the start of like Palakele and I guess kind of grounds in Sri Lanka in general being completely different to cricket grounds anywhere in the world. And somewhere where a captain would leave overs from Siraj and Khalil Ahmed in favour of bowling Rinku and Sky. So for all kinds of reasons, I think that was a really awful game of cricket.
Estelle, what was your 3rd worst performance by a team in Sri Lanka colours this year?
Yeah, so actually Nick's one, I had forgotten about it, to be honest, right? And now I'm kind of reconsidering how I want to order this. I'd still go with number 3 as Sri Lanka's overall, the men's team's overall performance at the T20 World Cup as my third third worst performance. I don't think I'm not going to pick the game in New York, the first game in New York, because I feel like that pitch was very much a kind of hit and miss. I mean, it was a lot to do with luck as well as skill, right? So I don't want to pinpoint that game, but overall the performance in the tournament I feel was one of the lowest. Again, we went in with expectations that we would be able to compete very well in those conditions, and just to fall flat with some really really bad performances. So I think that is my number 3 still, but yeah, reconsidering a lot of things given the other two answers from Nick and Dom.
So my number 3, I'm going to pick the opening game of the Women's World Cup against Pakistan, where we came in kind of people talking us up as dark horses. We're coming as Asia Cup champions. We'll talk about that at some point during the show as well. And sadly, the girls just weren't able to put it together. We got overruled off the occasion, and what I think is quite a mediocre Pakistan team actually got made to look like world beaters that day, and it was quite a disappointing day for us all. Dom, do you want to give us your what you think the second worst performance is? Just a reminder, we will come back to this and kind of between the four of us work out what the order of the 3 performances are.
Mark, my second worst performance was the Women's World Cup as well, and I think emblematic is that first match against Pakistan. Right, this is a team that they had beaten about a month and a half before, I think, and a team that we thought, okay, we're going to beat them. We're going to get this campaign off to a start, and then we can hopefully upset New Zealand and cause some kind of havoc. But the way it turned, right, because the bowlers bowled well, and Pakistan was all out for 116, and we're thinking, okay, we can chase this down. You know, our top 3 are in really good form, Lishmi, Chamri, and Harshita, and they just couldn't pull it together that match, and they couldn't pull it together for any of the other games. And that kind of set the tone of the tournament. And again, to harp on that theme, we mentioned first game of a tournament, bowling side does its job, and then the batters just can't deliver, even though they are notionally informed. So that set up what was a disappointing World Cup. And I think what made it disappointing, and we'll again get to this in the second half of the episode when we talk about the best, is how good they were playing in the months leading up to it. That's what made it particularly disappointing for me, is that this team played well and they didn't live up to their potential. And to add kind of insult to that, it was likely Charmry's last World Cup, T20 World Cup, and we would have liked to see her sign off with a top 4 finish or something like that, or at least with some heroics. And it didn't do justice to her storied career.
Yeah,
Nick, hold on. Go on, Estelle.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there are 2 sides to that performance, right? One thing is they came in with so much hopes and stuff because they were so good during the year, the Asia Cup performance, all of that. At the same time, they came in through qualifiers, right? So, you know, you have to temper your expectations as well. I think what was most disappointing was the fact that, you know, we know that they can play better than that, right?
Yeah.
And despite Sri Lanka having their best year in the women's game, for them to then have their worst World Cup where they did not win a single game for the first time ever, it was like it's almost like, you know, the tale of like 2 different stories in the year, right? You can split it in half and have 2 different stories. You can have that first half of it until the World Cup or until the Ireland series, actually Ireland tour, as like this, you know, unprecedented success. And then from there it was completely like the opposite. So sorry, I interrupted Mark because he was going to Nick, but that was my number 2 as well. And I think a lot of people will probably say, okay, you know what, games are always close against Pakistan, and Sri Lanka came through qualifiers. But I think given the success they had, that was a really disappointing performance because they didn't play well and lose, right? They just didn't look like themselves throughout.
So you're not you're not singling me out, but what you are saying is, until they saw me on the sidelines or in the stands guzzling lion beer and chucking down mutton rolls down my throat, they were fine. And then they saw me having a right old jolly time and thought, nah, I've had enough of this. Nick, what's your number 2?
So my number 2 is the Men's World Cup, the opening game against South Africa. I take a lot of what Estelle is saying, and I agree with it to an extent that the pitch made it a crapshoot. But for me, just the decision making across that game was so poor that it was just really disappointing. And we all went into that tournament with a huge amount of optimism, thinking that Sri Lanka could really do something. And I feel like that game kind of set the car crashing in motion. I mean, you turn up to a pitch which has never had a proper match played on it before, right? One warm-up game, and you decide to bat first. It's a complete minefield, and there wasn't the decision making to pivot and to realize that 100, 110 would be a really good score. Instead, they keep trying to blast their way. I look back and think of Patham trying to slam Bartman's first ball, a bowler who he's never faced before, for 6 and getting caught. Hasaranga charging Maharaj first ball. It was just it was really bad. And then also the failure to pick a single kind of traditional upright seamer. We went with 2 slingers on a pitch where there was so much variable bounce, where Dasun Shanaka and Angelo Matthews were causing huge problems. For me, just the decision making across the course of that game was so bad. It set Sri Lanka's T20 World Cup off on such a horrible tone, being bowled out for 77. And the whole tournament was bad, but that is what really stands out in my mind as a really crushing day when you were it's happening again.
We've driven Estelle to drink. Estelle, what's your number 2?
My one was the Women's World Cup, I think.
Oh,
yeah, you're up, Mark.
Yeah, because I agreed with the two of you. I just butted in front of Nick.
I'm going to go. My number 2 is going to be the World Cup loss to Bangladesh, because at that point you're like, right, you might be willing to write off that game against South Africa because of the pitch, because of the beginning of the tournament, and that Bangladesh game. Boy, we shouldn't be losing to them. You look at the 2 teams on paper, and look, I'm not just saying this for the sake of it because we have this quote unquote friendly rivalry with Bangladesh, but our team is much better than theirs. Me, yeah, our team is much better than theirs. We shouldn't be losing to them. It's embarrassing when we lose to them. It's even more embarrassing when we lose to them at major tournaments. We've now done that twice in the last 2 tournaments.
I've just remembered the timeout came then, right?
Quite late on. Yeah, the timeout was
23
in India.
23.
In India. Yeah. And this was
but
in Dallas, right?
Just for that purpose.
Till quite late on in that game, we were into it. It was only the last 6 overs or 7 overs they got away from us, and that's what knocked us out of the tournament. We should have won that game, and we should have progressed through. It's very, very disappointing. And then Bangladesh,
and am I right?
Remember what they did?
Isn't that the game when we scored 40 runs in our last 10 overs batting or something that we just completely went off the I remember it was so late at night in England and I was struggling to stay up and I was like, why am I forcing my eyes awake to watch this trash?
So were some of our batters by the looks of it. They were struggling to stay awake as well. Guys, shall we move into what you think our worst performance of the year was? We'll do the same order again. Dom, what do you think it is?
I was going to say the Men's World Cup, and I was going to harp particularly on that Bangladesh performance. We're 100 for 2 in going into the 15th over, right? We should be easily hitting 150, 160, right? We've got 8 wickets, and we just start throwing them away. I think Hasaranga tried to come down the wicket to Rashad Hussain and just ended up basically edging the ball right to slip. it was a disaster. We were in total control of that match. It was there for us to win. We were batting well, and we just threw it away. It kind of was akin to what Nick was talking about with the game against India, where we're in total control towards the end of the innings, and we just couldn't finish. It was kind of Dasun Chanaka's poor form kind of really came into view in this tournament, right? We kind of hoped he would be that finisher. We didn't get that from him. I think the other thing that struck me about the whole tournament is our bowlers actually performed well, and that's why we were optimistic, because we saw a bowling unit, right, that had world-class bowlers up and down and could restrict the other side. We almost won the game against Bangladesh because Nuwan Tushara had a phenomenal match, right? We kept them, we bowled well that entire game. Even against South Africa, they managed to score 80 runs in 16 overs, right? We took 4 wickets. And then we had a good bowling performance against Netherlands to cap it. And we never gave up more than, 125 runs in any of these matches. And we still couldn't do it. Like, if we had said from the outset that our bowlers were going to go bowl well, Tushara was going to be in the wickets, we were going to keep South Africa to 5 runs and over, we would have said, okay, we'll take that performance immediately. But our batters totally fell flat on their face. They had been batting well at the beginning of the year, and they just couldn't bring it around. In the fourth and final game, they did a little bit, but it was too little too late. And that for me is the most disappointing performance. We were set up to do well. We got conditions in which we thought we should do well. We had a bowling lineup that was world-class and performed actually quite well, all things considered. But the batting fell down. We got, maybe 2 substantial innings, I think one from Kusal and one from Patham the entire tournament, and that was just not good enough. It was also a tournament on the back end. If they made it to the semifinals in the West Indies, they would have had really, really favorable surfaces for them, spin-friendly surfaces. This is not, they're not scoring against India. India's not scoring 300 runs a game there. So this was a place where you get into the final and you have a chance, or get into the semifinals and you have a chance, or the final 8, you have a chance to do something and maybe upset someone. But they didn't give themselves that chance because they just couldn't bat well enough.
Nick, where you go for number 2? Oh, sorry, number 1.
My number 1 has to be 42 all out, mainly because I think of a phrase that we've repeated about a million times over the course of this year. It's the hope that kills you. And we'd all looked forward to that game for months. I had visions of us all in London together next summer at Lord's for the big one. And I didn't agree with the way Sri Lanka prepared for it. You get to that first day and South Africa are 53 for 4, and you're like, yeah, this is happening. And then the total lack of application, the inability to dig in through a tough period in that first innings, the way it bled over into the bowling and fielding attempt second time around, and then also like the fourth innings, the inability to again show fight and kind of like, the game was gone by that point, but you wanted them to gloss it and to show that they can do something, that they can hang around and bat through tough periods, and it just didn't happen. And given that I think it was probably Sri Lanka's most important test match in as long as I can remember, it was just, hugely, hugely disheartening.
Estelle?
Yeah, I agree with Nick. I think 42 all out for me again, it was the worst performance by Sri Lanka. Not just in terms of numbers, right? Of course, Dom mentioned when he picked it as his third one that bowled out in 13.5 overs, lowest total in Test cricket for Sri Lanka. All of that, I think it also comes down to the context of it all, right? Like Nick mentioned, right? Such an important game, and so I've picked 2 other tournaments as my other 2. The reason I put this as the worst is because in this there is no other team that's better equipped to do well, right? This test team going into this series, what could you have asked for in terms of personnel that could have been different to make them more competitive? Like there's no one you can add to that squad that would have you would turn around and say, oh, this guy would have made a difference. They had everyone who they needed. They had the experience in the batting guys who have toured South Africa multiple times. They were in a position, the bowlers put them in a position where they could have really, really put their best foot forward and got a good lead going into the second innings, all of that. And then they play like that, I think was the biggest disappointment, because again, the most important test, like, and some of these guys probably won't make it to another cycle. And who knows, I don't know, will Sri Lanka be competitive in the next cycle? Will there be a World Test Championship following the next cycle? We don't know, right? So it's all opportunities that were there for the taking. And I feel like they just dropped the ball. So I mean, they didn't even let us build some hope. It was like, they go into it and everything's done. So for me, that was the biggest disappointment, because like I said again, right, there's nothing apart from them having a warm-up game ahead of that tour. There's nothing else that could have been done to make them like more, more right for that opportunity, right? More suitable to take that opportunity. So that was the biggest one for me.
And also, I think, like we said at the time, I'm going over old ground here and digging into old wounds, but like they didn't have to be great in that first innings, right? If someone had just hung around and got 25 and they get up to 100, you're still in the game. Like they had to be really, really awful to bat themselves out of it in the first innings, and that's exactly what they did.
I mean, I concur that for me, that's the worst performance of the year. I think, we're meant to be doing our top three. I think really the question is, which of the other two performances, which World Cup performance you think is second or third place? I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think the order should be in third place the Women's World Cup performance, because regardless of what our expectations were of the women's team going into it, the reality is actually it's only something that SLC have put resources in the last kind of 2 years, is it? Maybe slightly longer. I can't quite remember. And actually, the men's team have infinitely more resources than the men's side have, so than the women's side have. And I think also actually probably had more expectation, and kind of failed in that regard. I mean, I was so excited about the idea for World Cup in the USA, and they totally.
Well, Dom was at the first game, right?
Yeah. I was going to say my first live Sri Lanka cricket experience with my son in tow, and that's what happens.
Oh dear! Oh dear! Oh dear! I hope you reinforce that we have won World Cups and South Africa haven't.
Yeah.
Though maybe they might end up winning the World Test Championship. Who knows? And then I think so my order would be Women's World Cup in third place in terms of the worst performances. The Men's World Cup in second place, whether you put the South Africa game or the Bangladesh game. I think slightly consequential. I would pick the Bangladesh game. And then that first test against South Africa. I was late for this record because I was kicking about I had to do some work around St. John's Wood. And I was walking past Lords, and it was raining and wet, and I was just thinking how glorious it could have been. It could have been amazing to just go there. Like I wouldn't have even been that bothered if we'd got 42 all out in the World Test final, because it'd have just been like the fact that we were there. I think I say that obviously I would have got totally worked up for it. I would have been ready to attack the South African embassy and take down every barbecue I ever see. Oh man, what an opportunity missed, right? An absolute missed opportunity. And I think the feeling I have is that we're probably going to go into a phase of rebuilding our test side now. And as you guys have all said, who knows when we might get into this position again. And I do think it looks to me like it's inevitable that they're going to tinker around with the way the World Test Championship works. From a Sri Lankan perspective, I think it works absolutely perfectly, even though it doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason for it. So please, Mr. ICC, don't touch the way it works, because I think it works well for us. And sadly, we just yet again fell at quite a late hurdle. But I suppose, in a way, we should just be happy that we got to that. Well, at least we're not England or Pakistan, where they were never at the races, were they?
Can
But
I
yeah,
say one thing though?
I'll go ahead.
I think we basically agree that it's 42 all out, then the men's World Cup, women's World Cup, right?
Yeah.
I will say though,
Yeah,
the performance that Nick mentioned as his third one, the India one, I think if you take it without context, it's probably the worst, right?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to say the last 3 overs of that match. Although, is that worse than 42 all out? Like when we were,
I feel like it was almost comical, right? Like,
yeah,
get bowled out by Sky and Rinku Singh, okay, and then come out during the super over and play like that. Like, I had completely forgotten about it, but like purely on performance, like, because like the World Cups have context, right? We're talking about expectations and all of that, and 42 all out also has that kind of the what made it important. This was an inconsequential game, but like, I mean, that was some disaster, right?
And it's kind of interesting too that we played that match and we thought, maybe we should put on some more ranked turners here and bring them out in order to like, that was the ending of the match. And then we thought, okay, let's do more of these. Because the next match was tied and should have gone to a super over, right?
Yeah.
There was another match against Bangladesh. Do you remember the one that when we went over there when Hasaranga got told off and he got suspended? That was quite a bad game for us as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
I'm just trying to
I think we've just kind of erased it from our memories.
So that's our 3 worst performances for Sri Lanka for the calendar year 2024. Thank you for watching and listening. Love your comments. Let us know what you think. Have we got the order right? Have we got it wrong? Was there a game we failed to mention? Should we have gotten more into... Was there recency bias? Do you think if that 42 all out against South Africa had happened in a test in February, we wouldn't be talking about it? Do we, was the New York game... For me, in a way, I think I probably talked to my therapist more about the New York game than I did the Durban game. But maybe the Durban game might be something I constantly keep bringing up. Guys, we've got loads of other content reviewing the year in Sri Lankan cricket coming out on this channel, so don't forget to hit subscribe. We'll be back again soon. Thanks for watching.